And welcome back to Area 51 and a half, where we talk about all things science fiction, fantasy, horror, and pop culture. I am your host, John Allen, also known as Spooky Uncle John. With me, as always, is my co-host and producer,
Snyderman 501, Nick Snyder.
And our techno-mage, Ren.
A.K.A. Pyre Lily.
Yay! So, Nick, remind our aliens how they can get a hold of us.
You can find us on all social medias, including Instagram, TikTok, Clapper, and Twitter by looking for it at the Area 51H, and you can search for us on Facebook by searching for Area 51 and a half.
Well, Nick, as you know, not that long ago, it was the Oscars. And you know what? I have to say, I know that a lot of people don't watch these award shows because they say that they're dull and they say that they're whatever. And they don't really care. They're not that invested because they haven't seen the movies. That's probably true. But this has to have been one of the more emotional Oscars that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Certainly because of the Asian representation, which we haven't seen a whole lot of. Mm-hmm. But the fact, Michelle Yeoh, she wins Best Actress, and it's the first time that an Asian actress has won that category. And it's 2023.
Yeah.
Oscars are 95 years old. And this is the first time that an Asian woman wins Best Actress.
Well, and that there's a whole conversation in that, but finally seeing Michelle Yeoh win an Oscar, that's great. Like, Michelle Yeoh's always been fantastic. I remember when she kind of first came on the scene in North America with Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Yeah. And she's done so much. She's actually wound up playing one of my favorite characters in Star Trek, the mirror version of Giorgio Philippa in Discovery. But she's fantastic, and I'm glad she won.
Listen, let's just talk about that. We're only going to talk about the top categories. So Brendan Fraser wins for The Whale.
Yeah.
Oh, it's nice to see Brendan Fraser back.
Yes.
But not only that, let's just pause for a moment because Ke Huy Quan wins Best Supporting Actor. This, of course, for Everything Everywhere All at Once, which just swept the top categories. So let's just pause for a moment. Because two actors from Encino Man in the same year win Best Actor and Best Supporting Actor. I think that's glorious. The big one for me, though, as a longtime fan of hers and a horror fan, is Jamie Lee Curtis winning Best Supporting Actress.
That was a long time coming.
Just a nomination. She's never been nominated before, but this brings me to the one sort of sad part for me about the Oscars, the stank eye from Angela Bassett, who didn't win.
Yeah.
I have lost a little bit of respect for that queen. I'll tell you why. The great character actress, Thelma Ritter, has a dubious record when it comes to the Oscars. She has been nominated for 6 Best Supporting Actress awards. Not a single win. Michelle Williams has been nominated more times than Angela Bassett. Not a single win, including 2023. Peter O'Toole never won an Oscar. Angela Bassett, you are not entitled to win.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. We've seen reactions throughout the years from different people. A lot of people have that level of professionalism where they don't get the Oscar, but they still stand up and clap. But we've seen it from people in the past.
That's respect. Yeah. That's respect. Everybody in that category did an award-winning performance.
Yeah.
Everyone. But there's only going to be one winner unless it's a tie. I can tell you why Jamie Lee Curtis won over you, Angela Bassett. You alluded to in one of our previous podcasts, Nick. Remember how you talked to me and you said, when we were talking about Black Panther Wakanda Forever, and you said, I told you that sometimes they get an Oscar nomination for an acting moment.
Yes.
And you had said that Angela Bassett deserved a nomination for those acting moments in Wakanda Forever. Do not disagree. But it's a moment compared to Everything Everywhere All at Once, where Jamie Lee Curtis isn't just a moment. She's in the entire movie throughout. Her first nomination. She is Hollywood royalty. Her mother has been nominated. The great Janet Leigh didn't win. Her father, Tony Curtis, has been nominated. Didn't win. She deserved the nomination. She deserved the win. She has done this not being a Nepo baby, because she is not a Nepo baby anymore. I mean, yes, nepotism gets you in the door, but your talent makes you stay.
Well, and that's the thing is Jamie Lee Curtis is probably one of the most talented actresses of this generation, of the past generation. She deserves an Oscar just as much as Angela Bassett deserves an Oscar.
She broke free from the mold that she was put in.
Yeah.
The horror final girl mold, the fun kind of action films and Christmas with the Cranks and all that. This shows that she has a great deal of range.
Yeah.
It kind of hurts me a little bit because I love both of those actresses.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have hurt Angela Bassett to be gracious and applaud.
And to be fair, Angela Bassett's going to get another chance. She's fantastic.
Well, but they're also women of a certain age, and roles do not come that much anymore for women of a certain age. So she might not get another chance. But so what? Peter O'Toole certainly didn't have another chance.
Yeah.
Thelma Ritter certainly doesn't have another chance.
Yeah.
6 nominations.
Yeah.
Not a single win. Anyway, again, the Oscars were emotional. We had a man with Down syndrome win an Oscar for, I think it was a documentary. All he wanted was for everybody to sing happy birthday to him, and everybody sang happy birthday because it was his birthday on the Oscars.
That's awesome.
I'm sorry I don't know his name because I just thought that the guys brought him up there, and I thought maybe he was the subject of the documentary. I didn't realize that he had a hand in producing this documentary. So that was a great time. And of course, God bless her, Elizabeth Banks, bringing out Cocaine Bear.
Yeah.
That was hysterical. And she knew the timing to do, because she's like talking to this person dressed in the bear going, are you trying to score off Sigourney Weaver? Don't bring Legend Sigourney Weaver into this. This is not... You wait for the after party like everybody else. And it was just, I thought she actually stole the show from Jimmy Kimmel a little bit there because it was hilarious. That bit was hilarious. Which brings us to her movie, Cocaine Bear, which we and I both seen, taking the world by storm.
Oh,
your thoughts?
Well, okay, so for the first time in a while, you and I actually didn't watch this movie together. You saw it in theater. I picked it up off of Amazon this week.
But I want to make Aliens. I made my dream come true. I finally saw a movie in theater where I was the only person in the audience. My dream has come true, and it was freaking Cocaine Bear.
I'm going to be very quick with my thoughts. I did not finish the movie because I just was not that interested. I'm sorry, I was not that into it. The movie it fell flat for me. Up until about the point of the ambulance scene, because that was wild. But the rest of the movie that I saw, I wasn't digging it. Part of the issue for me was I found the characters to be excessively annoying. Not to the point that I want to see them dead. I just wanted them off my screen.
Yeah, I'm going to challenge you to watch it again, though.
I'll give it another chance.
The reason I want you to watch it again is because this should be up your alley. I have a feeling you just weren't in the mood.
The other problem I had with it was the bear is just this CGI lump that doesn't have any personality. They could have done anything they wanted with that bear. Because, yeah, it's based on a true story, but they could have taken all sorts of liberties with this, which they did to an extent,
yeah,
obviously.
But, listen, Nick, honestly, Gentle Ben is dead. And Winnie the Pooh is doing horror movies now. So, they really didn't have much choice but to CGI a bear.
They could have done a puppet of some kind.
They don't do puppets anymore.
You know who's looking for work? The bear from the Muppets. He's clearly looking for work.
Fozzie?
No, the other one. The more realistic. But
what's Bear in the Big Blue House done lately? I don't know. But here's the thing. This is not It's not a big budget movie. We know
No.
that. But it is a fun movie. I'm going to challenge you. We're going to watch it again because I just think you were not in the right mood. Because there were scenes in that, like, and I don't want to do a spoiler alert, so we're not going to get into depth with it. But there were scenes like the ambulance scene, and anytime the bear, like, was just getting on the cocaine, it was... it's right there. Cocaine bear. That's all I need. I checked my brain at the door. I wasn't expecting it to be glorious. I wasn't expecting it to be like, hey, best picture. I was just expecting it to be popcorn, silly, fun, and it was.
The biggest laugh I got was the male EMT. That's a guy I follow on TikTok.
Right.
This is his first movie.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
okay.
he's normally a stand-up comedian.
And it's Ray Liotta's last movie, sadly enough. But I mean, like, I wasn't sure who was more strung out on cocaine, Ray Liotta or the bear. I mean, just the makeup that they did on him. But anyway, the other movie that we saw, Scream 6. Now we will issue our spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert.
All right, Scream 6, which we did watch together.
Yeah.
So before we get into
it, we need to be together for the trauma that is watching a Scream movie.
For the emotional support. Okay, one thing I'll say, it was the best Scream sequel so far, but that's not saying much because it still kind of sucked.
Well, since 2. I mean, 2 was actually
this was Scream 2 all over again.
I know. It's basically, I mean, 1 and 2 are the best Scream movies. After that, it just becomes gimmick and stunt casting.
It was miles ahead of Scream 5.
And 4.
And 4. I mean, and then there's 3, which the less we talk about, the better.
It had Lance Henriksen in it. Had Carrie Fisher in it. I mean, that's what I mean, stunt casting.
Lots of things have Lance Henriksen in them, John. I mean, I love Lance Henriksen, but that doesn't mean quality.
They're usually good.
Yeah. Okay.
So here's the big problem with the Scream movies, right? They rely on the gimmick and the Scooby-Doo ending. And
they also rely on, like, okay, in the past movies, the Ghostface killer typically can take a beating and keep going. But man, at this point, with this cast, I am pretty sure the Scream movies take place in the Marvel Universe because you can stab someone 20 times and they can keep going.
The mortal wounds that these people got were ridiculous.
The one chick gets a stabbing in the stomach, and she's like, nah, I'm fine, I'm just going to sit here for a while. And doesn't die.
Jen Ortega gets stabbed in the back and the stomach, and she doesn't go off in an ambulance.
Boyfriend winds up a pincushion. He's fine. He's good. Good to go.
Well, like, that was with the other thing. Like, how many people actually died in this too?
4. Not including the killers. 4 people died, I believe. The two yokels at the start. Samara Weaving and the therapist.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, 5. Ava.
Yeah, but, the core 4. Oh, my God. I just... Here's the thing. It's not like they didn't do... That opening, I thought, was great.
Oh, yeah. The opening for this film was fantastic. They set up a really, really good film with that opening. Unfortunately, a really, really good film did not follow.
There was a point when I said to you, the certain character who says a certain line, and I turned to Nick and I said, well, there's the killer, because the line was so obvious.
Yeah.
It was so obvious. And I know that they were trying to be sneaky, but I'm just like, no, I figured this out. I mean, you figured out that there was more than one ghost face, of course.
Yeah.
They're trying to be clever. They're not clever. And to me, I guess because I'm older and I started with the original Scream series, I was, that whole scene with Gale Weathers, I was so pissed off. I'm going, you better not, don't you dare kill her, don't you dare. So, but I mean,
they'll kill her in the next one.
I want to see those legacy characters. I hate that term, but I want to see those legacy characters because that to me is Scream. How do we get Neve Campbell out of this? I contacted Sydney. She's not coming to New York. She's going to run off to her safe place with her family. I was like, yeah, so you screwed over Neve Campbell for this movie. Good for you.
Yep.
Gail's not in it a whole hell of a lot, so why'd you even bother? And honestly, I don't, as much as Jenna Ortega is the it girl right now, I don't care about her character in Scream. Do not care about her older sister character in Scream. I think it's silly, the fact that she's Billy Loomis's daughter, and it's like, I keep seeing Billy Loomis in reflections, and I'm fighting my own mania. And eventually, it's like, what, are you going to become Ghostface eventually?
A poorly CGI'd Skeet Ulrich, by the way.
Oh, very poorly.
The only character I cared about, at least at the start of the movie, was Quinn, who fakes her death and turns out to be one of the killers anyway. But other than that, I didn't give a crap.
No, I know. And
even Kirby I didn't care about.
The truth of the matter is, I liked that character, Quinn. I wish that they had kept her that way. I wish they'd kept her around a little bit longer. I
think she added a certain level of levity that the Scream movies don't typically have.
Yeah, like my favorite line is she's a bit of a whore. and the roommates come home, and she comes out of her bedroom, and they're talking, and she said, "Oh, is that Paul?" And you hear Loverboy, who we never see, in the back. Who the f is Paul?
That was brilliant.
I mean, if that's the best you have to offer in terms of there was some really neat stuff that they did in here. Yeah. The subway scene, all that kind of stuff. There's good movies in here, but the way you fix Scream is stop with the Scooby-Doo ending, stop with the connections, stop with connecting it back to Billy Loomis, and just what I want to see in the next Scream movie is Ghostface, period. Still do the voice, that's great, but we don't find out who it is.
Yeah.
It's not connected to them, because that's what makes Jason work. That's what makes Michael Myers work. That's what makes Freddy work. That's what makes Leatherface work, is that we know who that person is. They're a serial killer. Boom. End of story. We know that. How many of these killers can be around?
A ton, apparently. Everybody that shops at a Halloween store is a potential killer.
Now, if you love these movies, I get it. I kind of get it. You grew up on them. Maybe you've got some emotional attachment to it the way that I do with Halloween. We're not trying to take that away from you. I'm just saying that, honestly, this is not the best franchise at all.
So, and that's kind of the thing, right?
And it could be.
I was a kid when the first Scream movie came out, and I adored it. And I liked Scream 2 and 3 a lot when I was a teenager. And then I got older and got some taste and realized that Scream 3 was really bad. But honestly, yeah, this is one of the better sequels. It's still not the greatest movie of all time, but there were enjoyable parts in it. I really did dig the subway scene. Because of where they were, because they were in New York, they were able to do some really different things in the film. That scene...
The scene in the store.
The scene in the store. The scene with Ava going across the ladder.
Yeah.
Man, that had me on the edge of my seat.
Yeah.
So for all that, I give this movie a pass.
And the acting's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I give the movie a passing grade, 5.5 out of 10.
Yeah.
I like that. But...
And with that, it is time for Nick's Roundup.
Right. So on this week's Roundup, we're going to talk a little bit about the new Ninja Turtles movie that's coming out. Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, which is being done by Seth Rogen of all people, which I'm digging.
Animated or live action?
Animated. And I'm really, really digging the look of the animation. Now they've cast 4 young boys. Oh my God. They've actually cast teenagers to play the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in this movie about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Cowabunga.
Yeah. But what they've done is they've anchored the rest of the cast with some more well-known names. So you got John Cena, you got Paul Rudd, Seth Rogen's in there doing a voice. Giancarlo Esposito is Baxter Stockman, and Jackie Chan is Splinter, which I think is a really neat little piece of casting.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So as a huge Ninja Turtles fan, I'm looking forward to it. I'll watch anything Ninja Turtles. I'll at least give it a chance. If I like it, I like it. If I don't, I'm sure somebody else will. It's all good. Now, moving on to another franchise, Star Wars. So, upcoming Star Wars movies, there was going to be a Kevin Feige Star Wars movie and a Patty Jenkins Star Wars movie. Those have both been shelved. Don't know why as of yet.
There's a lot of shelving going on in the comic, fantasy, sci-fi world here.
Now,
especially with Disney Plus.
I'm thinking with Kevin Feige, I think my personal thoughts on that is the Marvel ship needs some writing, and he might be taking time away from Star Wars to do that.
Yeah, the Marvel ship went all Poseidon Adventure at this point.
Patty Jenkins, I can't say much about that. And interestingly enough, they have not shelved the Taika Waititi Star Wars movie. That's continuing, and he's apparently going to be in it as the star. But that's a whole other thing.
You know, here we are again. We're here once again. You've taken a property which was near and dear to my heart, those first original 3 trilogies, and have crapped all over them. I am so sick and tired of Star Wars.
But if you go back before all the canon stuff is no longer canon, like having like Jade and having all the kids, like that's some stuff that's never been covered. And I mean, obviously, because they stopped it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, canon doesn't exist because it's at the whim of the writers, and it changes so much.
Yeah,
but that's what's good about The Mandalorian, is that they're actually bringing things back, because the people in charge of Mandalorian know what they're doing with Star Wars.
Yes, I agree with you.
They're making it Star Wars.
Yes, and they're taking a character and making that the main character, and then interspersing other kind of things like Luke Skywalker coming into it,
and Ahsoka and Bo-Katan.
I am loving Katie Sackhoff as Bo-Katan this season. Like, she's brilliant, and I'm just glad she gets to play that character in live action. Now, moving on to Marvel Comics this time instead of Marvel movies.
Oh, okay.
Right? So Marvel's bringing back the Ultimate Series, which I am excited for. Ultimate Series, for those who don't know, was a series of comic books in the early 2000s to early 2010s that took place in an alternate universe to the regular Marvel universe. It's the first comic iteration that introduced Nick Fury as looking like Sam Jackson. It introduced Miles Morales, and it introduced a much more hard-lined kind of jerk version of the Avengers. I love the Ultimate Series, and I'm interested in seeing where a new version would go. And just to kind of cap things off, Dead by Daylight, the movie. Now, Dead by Daylight is a video game that has you playing either as a final boy or girl, or the killer, and you have to either escape or hunt down the victims, right? So a movie's coming from James Wan and Blumhouse, which I am okay with that. If anyone's going to adapt that, I think that's the perfect team to do it. And it'll be interesting to see which killers or killer, if they do, I would like them to do an anthology series, but it'd be interesting to see which killer or killers they choose, because they have a good library of them. And of course, they also have their guest killers like Michael Myers.
Blumhouse is hit or miss with me. If they're going to do this video game turned movie, okay, you can play as Michael Myers. I want Michael Myers in there. Just get a dump truck full of money to Jamie Lee Curtis and go in and redo the final showdown between Michael and Laurie, because I cannot tell you and reiterate enough how much Halloween Ends sucks.
Oh, it's caused ongoing trauma.
It is. The reason is because somebody like me who was there from day one, and that's the final showdown. It's like, no, I'm sorry. As much as people hated H20, that was a better showdown. I cannot reiterate this enough, how much I hated the story of Corey.
Yep.
As a Legion main, I would love to see all 4 Legion members as the killer in the Dead by Daylight.
I would like to see, is it the Trapper?
Trapper. Oh.
Yeah, he's cool. He's so cool.
And once again, I have no idea what these 2 millennials are talking about.
Don't worry, we'll get you caught up on the game. You'll be fine.
Nick, thanks for that great roundup. Today, folks, we are talking about fantasy.
Yeah.
Specifically fantasy movies of the 1980s, because that's when it reached its zenith, its peak, if you will.
Yeah, I grew up on films like that. I mean, obviously we
all grew up on films like that.
I remember watching films like Labyrinth, like Beastmaster, things like that when I was a small child, still in Scotland, and just digging all of them.
And I was watching them when they first came out. But before we get into the meat of it, let's look at where I think things started kicking off. Now, interestingly enough, I wanted to find out what the first fantasy movie was. And it's like, going back to the history of cinema, to the very first part. So it's probably a silent movie, probably a short silent movie. It's not actually that French one with the rocket going to the moon. It's actually not that one. I can't think of the guy's name that did that off the top of my head. But it's called The Cabbage Leaf.
The Cabbage Leaf.
And it's that whole mythos of a fairy finding babies in the cabbage patch.
Oh, okay.
So it's magical and it's fantasy and all that kind of stuff. I don't know if I could pronounce the French director's name, Miu or something like that. But everybody has seen that image of the rocket going and hitting the moon in the eye, and those were the first sort of sci-fi fantasy movies, right, from the silent era. But I think things really took off after J.R.R. Tolkien wrote the Lord of the Rings series. And then Dungeons and Dragons became this huge game. And from there, that's when we really start seeing a lot of this fantasy.
Well, that's when you start seeing, the fantasy films, fantasy video games like Dragon's Lair, Legend of Zelda, stuff like that. For me, I can't pinpoint when I first saw a fantasy film. It's been ages and ages ago, But like fantasy film of the 80s are important to me because, one, I grew up on them, but they also had a huge influence on film going forward as well. I don't think we would have had the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films if we didn't have films like Conan the Barbarian, if we didn't have The Labyrinth, Dark Crystal, stuff like that. Yeah,
because prior to that, you mentioned about the Peter Jackson ones. We only had the Ralph Bakshi 1978, I think, Lord of the Rings, which was just a portion of it. And then later on, they did The Hobbit, which for some reason had musical orcs. But let's talk about some of our favorite ones. You mentioned a couple. You mentioned, let's talk about the Jim Henson ones first.
Right.
So let's talk about Labyrinth.
Right. So Labyrinth is... I love Labyrinth.
How can you not love Labyrinth? David Bowie, Jennifer Connelly, they knock it out of the park. Surrounded by basically Muppets on crack.
Yes. Okay, so Hoggle. I love Hoggle. He's great. And it's such a nice little arc for him in that movie because he is the sidekick and he is kind of a hero as well because he's playing this complete jerk at the start of it. And then he realizes no, he does like Sarah and he does want to help her and he does want her to succeed. And you see him go from not liking her at all to kind of leading her on as part of the Goblin King's ruse to being there for her.
Yeah, and this is a case where, unlike the Hobbit, with specifically where there's a whip, there's a way, the singing orcs, the music in this works because it becomes a musical because you have David Bowie in it, but you have at least two really great songs.
Yes,
Dance Magic Dance and When the World Falls Away. I don't think that's the title, but where they're in the fantasy ball and dancing at the masquerade. It's just gorgeous to look at because the production designs are either they were done by, I think they were actually done by both the Dark Crystal and Labyrinth by fantasy artist Brian Froud.
And another thing to mention with this movie is that one of the staples of 80s fantasy films is there is something in there that is typically total nightmare fuel.
Yeah. And
for me, for this film, I know it, and the neat thing about Labyrinth is that it does differ from person to person. But for me, it's the puppets whose heads roll off. They could take their heads off. That is frightening. Now, other people I've talked to, it's the hands, the helping hands, but it's really, really lovely. It's a lovely film. I love David Bowie in it. I love David Bowie, but it's his work in it is fantastic. It's iconic.
Yeah, people still dress up as Bowie in cosplay.
Yeah, from Labyrinth. I saw a David Bowie action figure where he's done up like Jareth.
Yeah, it's and honestly, like Bowie was a fantastic singer, he was a fantastic artist, but he was also a fantastic actor.
Yeah,
I can't imagine anybody else playing Jareth. I really can't.
Nor would I want anyone else to play Jareth.
Like he had the stature, he had the look, and the beautiful thing about casting Bowie in this character is the fact that he had I don't think Bowie was the handsomest guy in the world, to be honest with you. but he does have a sex appeal, right?
Yeah.
And so he can play that idea of this mischievous goblin person with the magic powers both being attractive and repellent at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's a difficult thing to do. And we see that because that's the whole thing with Jennifer Connelly's character, is that she's going on this journey from childhood to adulthood. And so to have that sexual attraction for somebody who is older and dangerous, and yet trying to maintain that sense of innocence is brilliant.
And I was just going to point this out because right now I'm waist deep in Picard, but one of my favorite little bits of trivia of this is Gates McFadden, who plays Beverly Crusher in Star Trek, did the choreography for this film.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a great film. I love the music.
I absolutely love the baby in the film.
Yeah.
Grew up to do Muppet work. And
Really?
now works for Jim Henson, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, he works for
The Jim Henson Company.
Yeah, like...
the Jim Henson Studios.
Yeah, the studios, yeah.
And so let's go to the other Jim Henson movie, Labyrinth. Or not Labyrinth, Dark Crystal. The Dark Crystal, we were just talking about Labyrinth. The Dark Crystal is, to me, probably the most perfect fantasy movie.
The Dark Crystal, again, one of those films that has nightmare fuel in it. I adore that film.
Oh, the Skeksis are terrifying.
Oh my God, the Skeksis. To this day, I am 100% sure that the Chamberlain Skeksis was the basis for Starscream. Just the way he talks and his just general demeanor. But anyway, everything about that film is a visual treat. Everything looks like something plucked out of a storybook.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful and so wild. And the Gelflings look... The thing about the Jim Henson Company, Jim Henson doing a movie like this, is that his puppet work has always been seamless.
Yeah.
Yes, we
He's
know...
the best of the best.
We know they're puppets, but they don't look or feel like puppets. It's not like Thunderbirds where he's like, yeah, that's a marionette, whatever. These are living, breathing creatures. And Jim Henson has always been the best at bringing this type of creature to life.
Yeah, and especially when you look at how they move and how they interact. You know, I think it was very smart of them to sometimes actually use a person in costume to do certain scenes, like when Jem is jumping away from the crab-like creatures that are sent out to him. And you're like, how do you not love a puppet like Agra? Like, that's everybody's old grandmother that's smoking weed. You know, it's like, she's a fantastic character.
So apparently a lot of the design of the Dark Crystal Muppets came from the Land of Gorch that got canceled off of Saturday Night Live.
Oh.
So Henson was like, I can do like adult stuff, like more adult themes with the Muppets. Well, here you go. Here's Dark Crystal.
You know,
that's cool.
It's the exact same.
But I think it was smart of him to do that, actually, because, you know, the Muppets were just... I think they were just finishing their TV run, like Kermit and all that kind of stuff. So he starts moving into these movies. He's got the Muppet movies, which are also fantasy, but for today's discussion, we're going to leave the Muppet movies out of it. But I mean, these were hits. Like, they were like knock them out of the park hits. Everybody had to see them. Everyone was talking about them.
So I wasn't alive when the movie came out, but I can only imagine that something like The Dark Crystal really hadn't been seen before.
No, it hadn't. And to see it, something like that on the big screen, like, this is why you need to go back to movie theaters, people. Movies were meant to be seen on a big screen. It is a very different feel on a big screen than it is on a small TV screen. Even your largest TV that you can have in your home does not compare to a movie theater. It really doesn't.
I want to make 2 points about The Dark Crystal. One, without The Dark Crystal, I wouldn't have had some of the stuff that I grew up on, specifically the Ninja Turtles movies, because it was the Jim Henson Workshop that did that, and the experience that they got from The Dark Crystal, you can directly see the influence on that.
Yeah,
on that movie. My second point is this, and I've made this complaint before, and yeah, it is a complaint. I don't care, but movies like The Dark Crystal are timeless.
Yes.
I can pick up the Dark Crystal and watch it, and it still looks great. As where, and I'm sorry to say it, everyone, if I watch the Avatar from 2009, CGI degrades so quickly over the years. It looks great when it first comes out, but it doesn't hold up. And the fact of the matter is that's why I prefer practical effects.
Spawn.
Oh, Spawn.
But, you know, it's great that you mentioned practical effects, because last night I watched Dragon Slayer, one of the other movies from the 1980s, co-production by Paramount Pictures and Walt Disney Pictures, believe it or not. And it's pretty much all practical effects. The dragon is a practical effect, and it still looks great. And the nice thing about a movie like Dragon Slayer is that it is not all glitz and glamour. It is a great story where you have the journey and the characters, especially the two main characters, where if you don't know the story behind Dragon Slayer, there's a dragon that, of course, is decimating a kingdom.
And he needs slaying.
It's holding a kingdom hostage. The king has made a deal that every at the spring equinox and the fall equinox, basically, they sacrifice one of the maidens to the dragon. Of course, it's always a female. It's never a male. And so the lead female character, her father has dressed her up like a boy throughout the whole journey, so to try and protect her.
Right.
The king has left the princess's name out of the lottery, because why not? Of course he can do that. People can pay money. The wealthy can pay money. Your daughters won't be in there, just the plebes. The wizard dies right from the start, and you're just like, wait, what? So the apprentice, played by Peter McNichol, takes over, and he's going to say, I'm going to go on this journey. I'm going to complete this journey. So from that character, we see this great arc where you have him humble because he's the apprentice, to becoming arrogant because he's now the master, thinks he's trapped the dragon forever in the cave, pisses off the dragon to no end, realizes that, oh, okay, I'm not all that. The lottery happens. The princess finds out that she's been kept out of the lottery. She throws her name into all of the tiles. So she's going to sacrifice herself. So, you know, the female lead comes out to the party in a dress, and everyone's like, wait, what? I thought you were a guy. Oh, you're a girl? Okay. And there's no begrudging that they have on the blacksmith, because that's who her father is, because he said, like, no, I'm actually applaud you for being smart enough to hide your daughter. I wish I was that smart to hide my daughter. And Ian McDiarmid, the Emperor from Star Wars, plays a clergyman in this.
Oh, awesome.
And Ian McDiarmid cannot survive a fantasy film. It's just the way it is. But you see this arc of arrogance to humility to, you know, and once you overcome that, then you can overcome the evil. But the brilliant thing of it is that I was watching with my mother, and I said, can you guess how they're going to slay this dragon? Do you understand what's happening here? Because the first time you watch it, you don't understand it. The wizard knew he could not make the journey. So he allows himself to be killed so that his ashes can be scooped up, placed in the lake of fire by the dragon, be resurrected, and then slay the dragon.
Oh.
But the work in this, the work of the dragon alone, the practical setting, the fact that it was filmed in like places like the Isle of Skye, you know, which is very medieval looking and primitive looking at times, really adds to the richness of this story.
Yeah.
And the effects, to your point, stand up. Yes, they're a little rough compared to today, but they stand up. They stand up.
And it's interesting when you look at how and where some of these things are filmed. Like the Isle of Skye is great, but a lot of them. I one of the things that I did for this podcast was I watched a fantasy film that I had not watched before. I chose Red Sonja.
Okay, yeah.
And it is clear they're just running around the California countryside. But like I understand that it's not the biggest budget film. It's the same thing as as a lot of the 90s sci-fi shows.
Yeah.
Like, it's clear that they're just running around the Vancouver countryside.
Yeah.
British Columbia somewhere.
Yeah.
But, yeah, you see where they put the money in. You see where... Red Sonja was essentially a companion piece to Conan. Now, they couldn't use Conan, but due to copyright issues, they couldn't use Conan in this movie. Schwarzenegger was in it as, I think his name was Kaldor or something like that. And he's clearly got it bad for Red Sonja, and he's just being this arrogant jerk. But it's clear where they put the budget for this film. In Arnold Schwarzenegger. I mean, I know Bridget Nelson was a star in the 80s. I don't know to what level, but...
she's one of those stars that she was up there and then she disappeared. Yeah. Kind of like Grace Jones. Whoop, boop, down.
I don't even know who that is.
There you go.
All right. So, but yeah, ultimately, what they did a really good job with what budget they had. It was fun to watch. I really dug... I mean... I could watch Arnold Schwarzenegger do anything, really. He's fun to watch. He's not the world's greatest actor. He essentially plays Schwarzenegger in every role he does, but he knows how to do it in a way that is entertaining and enjoyable.
That's what makes some of his movies ridiculous, but that's for another podcast. Not talk about fantasy.
Yeah.
But let's talk about Schwarzenegger in Conan, though.
Yeah.
Conan the Barbarian is a great movie, regardless of how you put it. It really gets the spirit of Howard's work. It gets the spirit of the comics that Marvel put out. It's just massively great.
And I feel like Tulsa Doom is really kind of slept on as an iconic James Earl Jones role.
It is. But I don't think it's slept on. I think people recognize that Tulsa Doom, the greatest metal band ever.
Yeah. But like, I enjoyed it. Schwarzenegger again,
oh, listen, that line has become iconic. Conan, what is best in life? To crush your enemies, to see them flee before you, and to hear the lamentation of the women. That's a great line. It is a great line from Conan the Barbarian.
Schwarzenegger, again, one of those iconic roles he has, but it's not as iconic as, say, the Terminator, even though it totally should be.
No, I think it is, but I think it is in a different circle.
You think so?
Yeah. When you think of Schwarzenegger, you think of the Terminator first, yes, but then you think of Conan second. You really do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. Or you think about those movies he did with Danny DeVito. But anyway.
So part of what makes these sword and sandal type of movies so great is the cinematography.
Yeah.
Is the location. Is the production design. And the fact of the matter, it is that idea of what every story is based on, that whole legend of the hero having a fall, almost being defeated, coming back from that. Because, I mean, they have to fight off demons from taking Conan to the afterlife.
Yeah.
You know, and coming back and defeating the evil. You know, which brings us to one of your favorite properties, Masters of the Universe.
Yeah, and that's another 80s action star who got his own fantasy film, Dolph Lundgren.
Yeah.
I love this movie. This movie, I'm pretty sure I wore out my VHS when I was a kid.
Now, can you honestly say, though, it's a great movie?
God no. But it's fun.
But what is great is it has Frank Langella as Skeletor.
Oh, Frank Langella as Skeletor. That was delicious. I mean, it has a good cast. It's got Meg Foster in it. It has Courtney Cox in it, a young Courtney Cox. Robert Duncan McNeil, if you're a Star Trek fan. There's a lot of the principal from Back to the Future is in it as a cop. Like it's a great little cast. And the problem with it is that it doesn't stay in Eternia, it comes to Earth, but whatever. It still looks like a good film. They did a great job with bringing some of the cartoon characters to life. The makeup job they did on Beastman was fantastic. And they brought they created some original characters for the movie, like Blade and the guy with the white hair. I can never remember his name, but anyway. All great makeup jobs though. But the film was a lot of fun. The film looked great. It kind of sucked that we didn't get Orko, but whatever. We got Gwildor instead. But it does follow that idea of the hero has to take a fall, and that is kind of the problem with the script, is that it doesn't come along naturally in it, but it still happens. And you get that iconic scene with Dolph Lundgren lifting the sword above his head and saying, "I have the power," right from the cartoon. Such a fun film, such a good use of effects.
Yeah. And the other thing, honestly, I haven't seen it in years. I saw it when it came out, but I haven't seen it in decades. But the only thing I remember is Franklin Gillis Skeletor sort of at the end coming up from the lake of fire, and it's almost like, till we meet again.
I'll be back. So I watch it at least once a year.
I love it. We're gonna have to watch that.
Yeah.
I think that because you mentioned Masters of the Universe, let's move into some of the animation from there. I mean, we could do a whole podcast of Ralph Bakshi, so I'm gonna kind of leave him out of it for now. But I'm going to turn to Disney did some of its best work, in my opinion, in the 80s. Like The Black Cauldron is a fantastic movie. It is the best animated movie that I think Disney ever made, partly because of one of the artists in it. Don Bluth was one of the chief artists. Now, Don Bluth was an artist like in the 70s and 80s with Disney, and he left Disney and did some of his own fantastic work. But when you look at The Black Cauldron, it is what we expect out of Disney. Like Disney Imagineering has some of the best special effects ever. And they still hold up today. Watch Darby O'Gill and the Little People as an example. Made like late 50s, early 60s. Sean Connery's first or second movie. And the special effects, not so much the special effects of the forced perspective of making the little people, but the special effects of the Banshee at the end is really frightening and kind of glorious, and it's still kind of neat to see. And they took that into the 70s and 80s. So you sort of see that influence, like I said, with Dragon Slayer. But The Black Cauldron, Disney is always looking for that next innovative part. And that's, I think, why Disney is suffering now, because they're not really looking at that innovation. But The Black Cauldron, the animation style in it, the story in it, Googie is hilarious, voiced by John Byner. I mean, it's like, there's gotta be munches and crunches in here somewhere. It's great stuff. Watching this story unfold that doesn't involve a Disney princess. It's not involved in a fairy tale. They are out to try and defeat this evil that is out there, and probably the best villain that Disney ever has, the Horned King. But nobody ever stops and thinks about The Black Cauldron.
Well, The Black Cauldron was a box office disaster for
them. And
it
shouldn't have been.
But I think that's why it doesn't get thought of.
Yeah, when you look at Disney in that era, you've got Tron, you've got The Black Hole, you've got the Black Cauldron, you've got Something Wicked This Way Comes.
Oh, yes.
It is the best stuff Disney's ever done. Yeah. Ever.
When I first saw Something Wicked This Way Comes, I was about 11 years old, and it was on Family Channel. I'm sitting there like, this shouldn't be on Family Channel. This is kind of scary.
It's a horror movie. Disney did a horror movie. Good for them. And it's a fantastic horror movie if you can ever find it. It's almost like Disney's dirty little secret, the 80s. It's like, we're going to pack everything away over here, except for The Great Mouse Detective. And we're just going to, I just really wish that people would find those things and understand that's filmmaking. That's Disney at its finest. It's Disney at its best. Don Bluth and Disney parted companies, parted ways. I'm glad that they did that, because Don Bluth gave us some of the best animated movies, more so in the 90s, but specifically to this conversation, The Secret of NIMH. Yeah. It is the most perfect animated movie I have ever seen.
The Secret of NIMH, it's one of those films that I wasn't even aware of. It's actually kind of funny because like looking at some of the other movies that Don Bluth has done, I wasn't aware of The Secret of NIMH until I'd come to Canada. But I had seen other films that he had made, like All Dogs Go to Heaven, for example.
Right. None of which compares to The Secret of NIMH.
No. But I mean, for kids movies are all like those are fantastic kids movies. That's a great lineup of kids movies. But yeah, Secret of NIMH. God, it was scary. Seeing it as a youngster.
Oh yeah, John Carradine as the owl.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And that's I feel like that's something that, just getting off the topic of fantasy films just for a second, just talking about kids films for a second. I feel like that's something that is missing in kids fantasy films is actual frightening things. They're too sanitized now.
Yeah.
And I think we're doing this generation of kids a disservice by not including things that are kind of scary.
Oh, Ringo's speak.
Oh, okay.
Speak. Child expert, speak.
So, yeah, they're desensitizing the films, but I know of children that have watched Grand Theft Auto. And I know of children that have played Call of Duty.
Yeah.
And so they're desensitized with the fantasy,
but
not desensitized with the reality.
I'm not talking about desensitization. I'm talking about understanding the emotion of fear and how that can affect our imagination. Mm-hmm. I grew up with a love of horror, and that part of that honestly comes from the fantasy films I watched as a kid, because I realized from a young age I kind of like being scared.
But then the kids can go see Scream and watch Halloween and Jason, and they get their fear from there.
Yeah, I guess.
Like, it's hard. They don't need to. If you put it in an animated film, they'll be like, "Well, that's animated. That's not real."
No,
or CGI or whatever.
No, but
they'll be like, "Oh, Jason could be."
But I understand Nick's point, because it's atmosphere building, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
and it's that sense of danger. Like we have. I mean, Miss Brisby is a mouse, and she is going to an owl. We know what owls do to mice.
It's a fantasy film, but things can be more than one thing at once. And that's what I think is kind of getting lost in general storytelling. Like, a horror movie is a horror movie. An action film is an action film. A kid's film is a kid's film. Well, you can have an action film with horror elements. You can have a horror movie with action elements. You have a kid movie with
and it doesn't make it one or the other.
Yeah.
But back to The Secret of NIMH. I think what makes The Secret of NIMH such a great movie is that it's more than just an animated movie. It is a gritty mystery and a drama that's happening to Miss Brisby. And why is it happening to her? Because her child is sick and they have to move because the farmer is going to plow the field. And she can't move because her child is sick. And this is the whole sort of thing that compels the movie, and then finding out what happened to her husband, because her husband is dead, and why he's dead, and the whole secret of NIMH. But look at the cast. Elizabeth Hartman as Miss Brisby. Then you've got Hermione Baddeley as the shrew. You've got John Carradine as the owl. You have Peter Strauss as, I think it's Justin or Jason, I can't remember. Will Wheaton as a child is in there, voicing Martin. I mean, it's just a fantastic cast that really brings it to life. And the animation is honestly like nothing you had seen before at that point. Even Disney had not done that sort of stuff, because it's, when you see a Don Bluth film, you know it's Don Bluth animation. The same way that when you see a Chuck Jones 60s animation from the Looney Tunes characters, you know that's Chuck Jones.
And that's kind of the thing. Let's say Chuck Jones. No, Don Bluth has a very dark sense to his animation. Even in his more kid-friendly fare, like All Dogs Go to Heaven, it has some very dark parts in it.
Like The Rescuers.
Yeah. Oh, God, The Rescuers. I love The Rescuers. It's one of my favorite Disney films. But anyway, like Secret of NIMH's great. A lot of the animated films back then, just to touch on it very, very briefly, there was a claymation film, The Adventures of Mark Twain, which was about a couple kids that just went on a intergalactic adventure with Mark Twain that came out in the 80s. And it was so dark and so scary.
Yeah.
But yeah, like a lot of the films back then, you can see the influence those films have, not just on fantasy films of today, but also on horror films and to a certain extent action films as well.
Mm-hmm.
Or even comedy. I mean, like, if you look at, not that it's a great film by any stretch of the imagination, but if you look at Your Highness with Natalie Portman that came out back in 2011, that movie very much pays homage to the old sword and sandal film of the 80s.
Yeah, and we've just touched on a very few of them.
Yeah.
And there's just so many more that sort of fall into a crossover. Like Krull is kind of a crossover, right? It's that medieval sword and sandal, but set in space.
You've got not along the same lines, but not exactly a sword and sandal film. The Ewoks movies, the TV Ewoks movies that came out, are definitely made in that same idea. They have that same feel to them.
Well, as you remember, I said years ago when VHS first was starting to come out, and you first had video stores, the section was science fiction, fantasy, horror.
Yeah.
Because there wasn't really enough to do it. But then in the 80s, particularly, fantasy and horror were becoming so big that they kind of moved apart.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're kind of left dividing it up. So, I mean, we haven't even talked about Spielberg's greatest fantasy film, I think, The Goonies.
Yeah. So The Goonies, oh my, that's another VHS I wore when I was a kid. I love The Goonies. I love that cast. Like, the cast works so well together, and Sloth is just the best.
What a simple premise.
I know.
You take these kids who are from the poorer part of town that everybody puts down and they call them Goonies. That's why they're called the Goonies. And their homes are going to be sold. They have to sell their houses for whatever reason and move. And they're just so kind of despondent about not being able to be friends anymore and be around each other anymore, that they go on this one last adventure to find One-Eyed Willie's treasure.
I'd had a field day if you said booty. But anyway.
I know. I could have said that, but I didn't. But I mean, but even from that, I mean, this is how popular things were then, because wrestling was high at that time. This was the MTV generation. They were making little movies out of videos. And you have Cyndi Lauper's song, Goonies Are Good Enough, split into two little mini movies that had all of those iconic wrestlers in it. And it's just probably one of the more iconic fantasy films of that era, not directed by Spielberg, but produced by Spielberg.
So I've been watching Young Rock, and they actually have an episode where Young Rock goes to the premiere of The Goonies Are Good Enough, and the Iron Sheik character remarks, "Oh, it's a great music video, but I have no idea what it has to do with the Goonies." But anyway,
but that was so much fun, and that's the thing. It's like, I think the great thing about fantasy is that it can either become a really telling tale, a really gripping tale, like some of the anime from that era.
Yeah,
is just fantastic tales that are completely different from North American society altogether. And you just lose yourself in these worlds. And it's a great way to spend a couple hours to not worry about everything. And you know what? I think here in 2023 and moving forward, we need more movies like that.
Honestly, yes.
To just forget about the world for a few minutes, to just move away and have some fun and everybody come together and don't worry about insurrections and people being incited to riot and wars and the housing market, and oh my god, I would hate to be a kid now.
Here's my thing. As you know, as our listeners have learned, I love horror. The reason I love scary movies is because they're very personal and they give you an idea on what the writer they give you an idea on the writer's psyche. But with fantasy films, it's a whole other thing. Fantasy films are about having that huge imagination, thinking big, and getting that idea onto script, onto screen.
Yeah, it's like
just blowing the audience's mind.
It's like the Bonnie Tyler song. We need a hero. Holding out for a hero. Yeah. That's what's great about the fantasy movies is that you have a hero. Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, it's hard for me to, like, I know Star Wars is science fiction, the original Star Wars movie, but it wasn't done like science fiction. It was done like a sword and sandal movie.
Yeah, I've always thought of Star Wars as science fantasy.
It is. It's completely fantasy where you have that hero from a humble beginning moving into save the day against this oppressive villainy.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just, that's what we need more because storytelling seems to be getting lost. Speaking of storytelling, again, going back to Jim Henson, you had fantasy on television. You had the storyteller.
Oh, the storyteller.
Amazing stories. I mean, the Twilight Zone reboot series. Like, there was all kinds of, like, there was nothing that it wasn't permeating in. And I miss that kind of era. It was so simple that I could hide away from bullies. I could hide away from the world on the weekend and just watch these things, to go see it on a big screen at the Capitol Theater, to watch it on television, to be able to rent. I don't even remember what those called, those great big Laserdisc things. You just had to go and rent the machine, and you got 3 movies for renting the machine. And you put it in, and it ran half the movie. Then you had to put in the case, pull it out, turn it over, put in the other half of the movie. But it was so much fun. I mean, you got that. And I mean, here I am spending weekend watching The Secret of NIMH, watching Supergirl, it's just, I miss those days. And I don't think you guys even have anything that can compare to that.
Honestly, not really, because everything is just a giant CGI mess now. I mean, I would think if it was done with practical effects, Avatar would be that. But the fact of the matter is Avatar just looks fake.
Yeah. But it's getting to a point where I don't think people can really appreciate it in the same level. They seem to be settling for banality. Now, superheroes have become their own genre. At the time, Superman, Supergirl, anything that came out in the 80s, Batman, that was fantasy. It was before the Marvel, MCU, and DCU and all that kind of stuff. So that they fell into the fantasy categories. So the storytelling was much better. It was much richer. You had to introduce yourself to the hero. You had to go on the hero's quest with them. You had to watch them be defeated, and then you have to watch them save the day. But the sacrifice of it.
Yeah.
Specifically when you think about Superman, the movie, Christopher Reeve's Superman. He loses his planet. He comes down here as an infant. He is raised by the Kents. We all know that story. But in the movie, you see Superman do these wonderful things. He's introducing himself to the world. He saves Lois Lane from falling from the helicopter. Don't worry, miss, I've got you. You've got me. Who's got you? And it's wonderful to watch because even in that movie, we see Lex Luthor defeat him with the kryptonite necklace.
And that's kind of the thing. These movies were good at building stakes.
Yeah.
There were high stakes in these movies, and you didn't know what was going to happen. But the problem with movies nowadays, specifically with Marvel films, the stakes aren't there.
Yeah.
Like, 2 movies that just popped into my head. One is Shang-Chi, and the other is Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness.
Yeah.
We know that they're going to win. There's no stakes here. Yeah, at one point they released the evil dragon in Shang-Chi. We know he's going to defeat it. At one point, Wanda gets a hold of America Chavez to sacrifice her. We know Doctor Strange is going to defeat her. There's no stakes. Show us something where the hero fails.
In that Superman the movie, Christopher Reeve's Superman is faced with a dilemma. He's in a no-win situation. He needs to get that kryptonite off of him. Who's going to get that kryptonite off of him? Miss Tessmacher. Only she can do it because she's the only one left there. She's angry at Lex because he sent these 2 missiles to destroy it. And her mother lives in one of these areas. Mm-hmm. So her deal with Superman is, I'll get that necklace off of you, but you save my mother first. And he does that. And what's the consequence of that? Lois dies. Lois Lane actually dies. And you see the trauma that he goes through saving everybody else, yet sacrificing his desire.
Yeah.
So it's not without stakes. It's not without sacrifice. And then, of course, he does the time turning, which is ridiculous, but whatever. It works. But that's what I mean. There is real stakes at it. And when you don't have those real stakes, you don't get as invested in that journey.
And that's the thing, is like, yeah, exactly. When you don't have the stakes, there's no emotional connection there with the main character. It's just flashy, bang, bang, yay!
Yeah, that's what makes the Empire Strikes Back so fantastic. They lose!
Yeah, that is not, like, Empire Strikes Back, great film. It's not a fun movie, because, oh my god, they lose.
Yeah.
And you don't know what's happened to Han at the end of that movie. Is he alive? Is he dead? We don't really know.
Yeah.
Is the Empire going to be able to rebound from their loss in Hoth? We don't really know. We see some ships at the end, but we don't know how big the alliance is at that point.
You know, and that's kind of like, let's sort of go full circle here as we wrap things up. That brings us back to Scream. The reason that Scream fails so much is because you don't have that good versus evil. Because it's just, you have all of these different gimmicky ghost faces.
Yeah.
You know?
Everybody has their reason to be a ghost face, and a lot of times they're not compelling reasons.
No, but at the same time, it's like, oh, it's revenge because you hurt whatever. But, you know, but that's what I mean. Like, I don't see the growth within these heroes. Whereas if you look at the original Halloween, you have that good girl.
Mm-hmm.
That good girl keeps everything safe. She's our way into it. The only reason that Laurie was in any danger is because she was concerned about her friends, because her friends were doing awful things, and she went over there to find out what was going on. Otherwise, Michael never would have... I don't think he would have come over there, because I don't think he knew where she was, but he was quite content in the Wallace's house. But you have that whole idea of that journey of good versus evil. You've got the good girl. She's an innocent girl. The only reason she has to suffer is because she did a hit a pot, which, you know, back at the day was, but, you know, you have that compelling hero in Samuel Loomis. You have the fact that Michael Myers is evil personified. You have all of those things in place where she sacrifices everything. She almost loses. She is brought down to bare bones, but she knows she has to go on to protect the children. And even then, she almost loses it until Loomis comes in and shoots Michael. And it's pulse pounding. And it's one of AFI's top 100 most pulse pounding moments.
Sorry, I do need to go back to Scream 6 for a second, because you just made me realize something. The killer's plan in Scream 6 was absolute crap. Because at one point, Sam says to Tara, "We're getting out of here." And Tara gives pushback on that. What if Tara had not given pushback on that? If Tara had said, "Yeah, we do need to get out of here," the killer's plan would have been completely shot.
Yes.
Done.
And you know what? That's the whole thing about these movies. It's the hero and the villain. It's that idea of this hero coming from an unlikely source, an unlikely place, being thrust into a dilemma, a moment, an emergency, whatever you want to call it, not of their choosing, and rising up and finding the bravery to go on and to succeed and to defeat the evil or the overlord or whatever. And when you don't have that compelling a movie, the movie suffers. The story suffers. You need to get back to good story writing. And if you can find it, we didn't touch on it, but if you can find it, I mentioned about television. If you can find Jim Henson's The Storyteller, great fantasy series, lasted one season. That's all the time we have for this episode of Area 51 and a half. Nick, remind our aliens how they can get a hold of us.
Well, aliens, you can find us on social media. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on TikTok, Clapper, and Twitter, all by following at the Area 51H, as well as by searching Area 51 and a half on Facebook. Now, as we were just discussing fantasy films, I do want to let everyone know that we will be seeing the new Dungeons & Dragons movie, and we'll give our thoughts on that in the next podcast.
Thank you for joining us on our landing pad, aliens. For Ren, Nick, and Spooky Uncle John, we're signing off from Area 51 and a half.